Now I'd like to ask the BIF panel to come forward and then introduce our sponsor, Ed Fay with CMC America. He's the sponsor of BIF, and he's going to introduce their program today. So,
good morning, everyone. I am not the sponsor of BIF. I am the sponsor of this session for BIF, and there is a difference. One of the best ideas that BEMA ever had was the Baking Industry Forum, and it's our privilege to again sponsor this session here at this BEMA meeting. My name is Ed Fay. I'm the president of CMC America. We're a proud sponsor of this breakfast and presentation. We appreciate all the hard work that all the members have done to bring this forum this far over 10 years. BIF was begun in 2005 by BEMA and members and bakers who recognized that there were certain issues in the industry that really were not being discussed openly and objectively by both bakers and suppliers. And so, coming together, BIF brought bakers and equipment, ingredient, and other members to discuss and address problems of training, hiring, safety, energy efficiency, and so much more. This year, they're returning to some recent topics to provide follow-up that you, our members, suggested we should continue. They will also provide insight into the alphabet soup of compliance and how that might redefine equipment design and supply chain. And so now I'd like to recognize the bakers and the suppliers who serve on BIF. We're proud to have all of their involvement. So if the suppliers in the audience would please stand when your name is called. They are Gary Ellington at Quick Lock, Mike Pierce at the Austin Company, Clay Miller at Burford Corporation, Jim Warren at Reading Bakery Systems, Mike Day at Banner Day, and Lisa Arado at Zeppelin Systems. We should thank them for all their work. It's now my privilege to introduce the BIF bakers who are here on the dais and going to be presenting today. They are Jeff Teasdale, the manager of engineering for fresh and frozen bakery at Pepperidge Farm. Jeff Dearduff is the vice president of operations for Arista. Pat Wilkens, the director of engineering at Schwabel's Bakery. And Mike Fronczak, director of engineering at Dawn Food Products. And I think, as was mentioned, Jack Lewis and Dave Hippenbecker and Robert Benton were not able to join us this year here, but we look forward to their continued input. So I now invite Jeff Teasdale to begin our presentation today.
Good morning again, everyone. Great to be here again to serve the BEMA and the bakers of the world as part of the BIF Council. Our first topic this morning is a follow-up from 2 years ago in Puerto Rico. We gave an extensive presentation on safety, and through that process, the bakers in the team all realized we all have a process and some documents we all use for projects that, generally speaking, we call safety checklists. So coming out of that, we decided to combine them together for you and create a vendor safety checklist that we can share with suppliers of the world for your use to know what to expect from bakers as what they're going to ask around safety in their equipment. I thank Dave Hippenbecker. He took the lists of companies like mine and Jeff's and Pat's and his own and combined them together into a slightly more concise list that included topics from all of our lists. And then this file is available to you on the the BEMA resource page on the website. And it is by no means as extensive as you probably see from some certain companies like my own, but it really gives you a good sampling of what any of your customers are going to expect. Some will also include a little bit more extensive areas for the food safety. This checklist itself is more around personnel safety. So we invite you to use this resource in your own construction of equipment while you're designing and building and prior to factory tests from your customers. And this is the link to the website where you can find the resources. Next up, I invite Jeff Deerduff. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Jeff. So, as we get prepared for a presentation, be it the Winter Summit or here, the group has a list of working items that we go through. This is one that came up we've seen as very important. We call it the alphabet soup of compliance, or ABC, as easy as 1, 2, 3. So we're going to take you through some of the things that the bakers are dealing with, that you're probably hearing about or dealing with in some cases, as far as how we are complying with the federal government regulations, with our customers' audit programs, and various things that way. So the first question we ask ourselves is, what goes in the bowl today? And the alphabet soup, or the acronym catalogs that maybe even some of your companies have, lead you to understanding a lot of what these acronyms mean, but we're going to take you through what they do for us. So the first one that goes in the bowl is what we call FSMA, or the Food Safety Modernization Act. This is something that is definitely coming our way. I was at another industry meeting a couple of weeks ago, and an individual from the FDA was speaking at that. And they actually said, we really don't know when this is going to be in law, but we know that it's coming, and we have to prepare for it. So some of the things that are coming to the baker and will apply to much of the work that your group does in bringing us equipment solutions and system solutions. The biggest thing that's really coming our way is a raw and ready-to-eat separation in our plants. Many of the bakeries that we work with are it can be 10, 15, 20 years old, and we're built with the old philosophy of you mix there, you bake there, and you pack there. We're coming to a situation where there's going to be separation, physical separation between these rooms, so that your raw materials and your finished goods don't cross. And it not only means the foods themselves, but also people. Gowning up, going from one section to another, using tools specifically in those areas, are all things that are going to affect us. So when we think about the equipment that we're buying, we're going to be thinking about, how do we keep that separation clean? How does it, layouts can be different because of that. You may have to run longer distances between components, and these things, the FSMA will play a role in that. You can learn a lot about this. It's all over the internet. You can read about what the government's thinking. ABA is very involved with the building of this program around with the government officials. So ABA has a lot of thoughts and comments and a lot of inputs on this. So always a great place within the committees of ABA. They will help you understand this as well, which I know many of you are part of. The next thing that we see fall in the soup bowl is FSIS, which is the Food Safety Inspection Services. The key takeaway here is that there's a lot of inspectors out there. There's actually more inspectors in the system right now than there are places to inspect. So we fully intend to be prepared for these inspections, every day as we go through this. This is one I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association. They have a couple of things that both the baker and the equipment manufacturer need to be well aware of. NFPA 68 around our explosion of our dust and our ingredient systems. 86, which is a lot with our oven controls and the safeties and the items within the fire systems of our boilers and ovens. And then 70E, our arc flash. So many times when we put out request for quote with you guys, you're gonna be seeing not an option to be arc flash ready, but basically a demand for it. So I think I talked about this before at another time, is when a lot of times we see options on your quotes, we're going to start seeing that as part of the requirement and not an option. And then, you know, how can you guys help the baker? One is, you know the rules, read up on this stuff, understand that when we come to you, you know, the inspectors are coming our way first. So do all you can to help us be ready in the field. The next thing, BRC, the British Retail Consortium. It's another place that a lot of our customers refer to when they're auditing our bakeries and food plants. It's really it's kind of viewed as the gold standard for food safety regs across the globe. It's recognized by consumers, which is, you know, we think about our consumers every day and how we prepare for them and how we better supply them. So when they're thinking about BRC, we're definitely thinking about it as well. And then audits, you know, there's just a number of audits that'll come in that are based on BRC type formats that we could get. Any one of us up here from the bakery side, we could be seeing 100 audits a year in a bakery based on customer bill or customer set, local regulations, and so on. The next thing, AQMD. Now this is sort of a California term, but it's really to do with air quality management. Every state has something. AQMD is one that really pops up because most legislation around some of these items start in California and kind of come with the weather, you know, west to east. So we always keep an eye on that. They get involved in some pretty interesting stuff. You see some of the national restaurant chains talking about sriracha sauce for sandwiches and things like that. These folks actually audited a sriracha plant in Southern California and shut them down because of the odor they were putting out from boiling peppers or whatever it is they do to make the sauce. So very interested in keeping our air clean for our populations. The next thing, OSHA. Obviously, this is something that everybody's been well aware of since the 70s. It doesn't get any easier. Every day there's something further that we need to be working on around OSHA. They put out these regional notices regularly. You can pick these up on the internet. They're a good, you know, somebody can go in and look at this once a month or take a look at specific topics. You can be on the front edge of what, you know, what we need in the field and what you'll be, you know, asked to comply with from how you're building your equipment and safety in mind for the operators. Few emphasis programs they've been working the last couple of years. The lockout tagout obviously is a big one when it comes to machine design and operation. Fall protection, that's become a very big emphasis program. And the thing about OSHA is you go and you start reading about why they think about this stuff, and you start understanding the types of accidents that happen in the workplace. You quickly understand why it's important to know not only what they're thinking about, but also know what we can do to stay in line. Combustible dust kind of rolls back to the NFPA stuff, but very, very hot topic. And then machine guarding. Most accidents in the workplace, and if you carve out the baking industry, are around machine guarding issues. So I know we've all talked about that in other settings, other meetings, but machine guarding just has to keep getting better and better as we go along. Not only better to protect the people, but we also have to be better at how a machine comes apart so we can service it as well. A lot going on there. GFSI, another global food safety, this global food safety initiative. This is kind of the framework for many of the audits that we face, and another great place for all of you to kind of study up on. I'm sure many of you have crossed these paths before. But it's really about bringing international food safety experts together. It's kind of it's almost a forum where they kind of decide what works well or what needs to be better. So GFSI is that framework, and something that we all should know a little more about. And this is one that I learned through this exercise of putting this together, FSSC. It's another global initiative around food safety. It's actually the backbone for that list on the right-hand side of the screen. Those are different countries around the world that have specific audit programs, and this FSSC is the backbone for that. So you got BRC, you got GFSI, you got FSSC. You know, this whole alphabet soup really starts getting complicated. So what else goes in the bowl? Well, pretty much everything you see left or right of the bowl ends up in it at some time or another, and it's all things or all regulations that we're dealing with in the field. So the more each of you can think about some of this, dig into it. I mean, it's not something you're going to study and, you know, become experts on. We're not. But it's something that we need to know a little bit about everything. So it's good to understand all the different regulations that play into the stew, because that's really what's happening here. We're boiling up a concoction here that says you almost need a person in a food plant today just to manage all the different things that are going on. Actually, you need a team of people to manage what's going on there. So as all that goes in the bowl, you know, what it really tells us is, you know, there's certifications that we'll have to have, whether it's a BRC or some other localized certification program. That equals audits. Audits equal gaps. In other words, audit's going to come in and say, oh, you missed something here. Now we have a gap we have to fill. Gaps can sometimes, and many times, equal design changes. Design changes to the baker obviously cost money, and I know it costs you money too, because you're redesigning and spending time on the drawing board. Wow, that was old. On the CAD, you know, changing how things look. So proper design eliminates those design changes, and eliminating design changes saves money for all of us. So the real key message here is understand what the food plants are facing, understand what that means to you know, your manufacturing techniques and your designs, and you know, we'll all be in a much better place long term. This is a link again on the resource page for BEMA, but this gives a definition of some of those things. So encourage you to reach into the website, pull this down, and this would be a great study guide to start understanding what's out there and what we need to be looking at. So we always have a team effort around these presentations, and working on this particular presentation here over the last number of months is Lisa Arado, Gary Ellington, and Mike Pierce, and myself. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Our next section we're going to speak to, the remaining four of us, is the life cycle of successful projects, or project management methods and the teamwork that goes into having a successful project from start to finish. Working on this with me were Clay Miller, Jim Warren, Mike Day, and Mike Fronczak, and I'm Mr. Wilkens. Sorry, missed you there. And Pat Wilkens. Who proofread this? We all did, so. So a couple little jokes here first. Let's, from your supplier standpoint, here's why you do not need project management. A little sarcasm. Our customers really love us, so they don't care if our products are late and don't work. We might have to understand the requirements and document a lot of stuff. That's such a bother. We figure it's more profitable to have 50% overruns than to spend 10% on project management to avoid them. And all of our projects are easy, and they don't have a cost, schedule, or technical risks anyway. So the life cycle of a project is from idea to post-startup. There are many critical best practices for success for the Baker and the suppliers. Bakers, the customer, and the suppliers, it's an equal responsibility for a successful project through, proper management. And we're going to speak to 4 phases of projects here and split it up amongst the 4 of us. And then Mike Day is going to summarize from the supplier's viewpoint as to what he's been hearing from us. And we've had some really terrific conversations on the phone and in person about this. We're going to talk the project development phase, the needs and expectations of a project, the approval and order phase, where we're talking about getting the agreements in place and the contracts, the active project management, once the project's been actually kicked off and orders been placed all the way to startup, and then the completion phase. You start it up, and how do you get this project done? The type and scale of your project obviously is going to control how deep you go into a lot of project management. If it's a unit piece of equipment versus a completely new line, there's different levels of intensity and the number of people involved in the team, but the basic principles apply to every purchase that a Baker might make with you. A couple more anecdotes here before I go to the next section. Fast, good, and cheap. Choose any 2 and your project can be successful, right? If you change the word cheap to on budget, you can have all 3. And that budget is part of your development phase where everyone agrees to what is the timing, what is good, and what is the budget. There's never enough time to do it right the first time, but there's always enough time to do it again, right? Find time to lay out the expectations so you get it done right the first time. With that, I hand over to Pat Wilkens, who'll discuss about the development phase of projects.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm surrounded by 2 Jeffs and 2 Mikes, and they want me to say my name isn't on a slide. I don't think that's going to happen. Okay, so where do needs for projects come from? Often it's one or more of the following stakeholders: marketing and sales in the form of R&D, production with a desire for increased volume or product quality where they're required, engineering for safety enhancements, process improvement, code or regulatory compliance, maintenance with equipment repair needs or improving equipment reliability. You, the vendors, also bring it to us, introducing new technology and designs that improve bakery efficiencies, reliability, productivity, and safety. These are all examples of the folks that identify deficiency in the needs for projects. When identifying potential projects, it's important to get decision makers involved early to confirm their interests in addressing the needs or eliminating the identified deficiencies. Be sure to discuss with the decision makers the criteria to be used for evaluating the project solution as well as the selection and approval processes. Once a need has been identified and interest expressed by the decision makers in addressing the need, expectations for the project need to be developed. Things to consider are: what are the benefits of doing a particular project? What will it improve? Things such as product offerings, new products, production efficiencies, reduce waste and scrap. What deficiencies will it eliminate? Safety concerns, poor reliability, and maintenance-intensive things that maintenance is doing. After establishing project expectations, it is valuable to identify the priorities of the project. Project priorities might include safety requirements, which for I believe most bakers is usually #1 priority is safety. Minimize production disruptions. How can we install things in such short downtimes and windows? And for us personally, that is the hardest thing to do. We never seem to shut down long enough to do a proper job. Anything we can do on the front end to make things go in easier, quicker. I think every bakery out there will pay more to be able to cut installation time down. Other considerations when developing a project are who are the potential stakeholders touched by the project? How much is it going to cost? What's the budget? What is the potential ROI? Who and how is the project going to be delivered with? Will it be done in-house, utilizing your own in-house people or the bakery's in-house people? Outsourced to a firm to manage? Or outsourced to a vendor for a turnkey solution? Or a compilation of all of these? What factors does the bakery consider in choosing a project partner or vendor? A lot of things are reputation and experience. Possibly bakeries standardize on the same equipment all the time for the same areas. Lead time. Usually on large projects, I don't think we really get too much into lead time. Everybody's planning far enough out. But possibly on shorter unit machines, if someone needs one right away, lead time could play into that. Price, although up for debate, the least expensive, not always the best option. Aftermarket support and safety record. Often the need to assess a project's impacts on production. How will project implementation impact production? As I said earlier, this is every project we do, this seems to be the biggest Achilles heel, is how do we get around what we're already doing? Can production accommodate the required downtime? You need 72 hours and we're willing to give 48 hours. Somehow we gotta come together and meet in the middle. And that's where if we can design equipment easier, we're gonna pay more for it. If there's less to do in the field on installation, it just helps everybody out tremendously. And it's probably gonna get done better in your facilities. Must production be maintained during project implementation? How do we install a new line with several other lines running? As we talked earlier with all the regulatory agencies, that's getting worse as well. How do you install a new oven, insulate it, and do everything, and you've got makeup running 30 feet away? All of this is just making it a lot harder for bakeries to function daily like we always used to. What decision makers within the plant must be consulted? Normally, there's a whole variety of people we consult with: operations, production, maintenance, sanitation. They all have input. However, they may or may not have the authority to alter the scope of work. And again, the key decision makers really need to approve any changes that we're doing to a project. We've had several instances where either a sanitation or a production person comes up with these wish lists. They pass it along because maybe the vendor knows these people as well. And then all of a sudden, when it comes time to writing the check, it's, there's surprises on there. So we have to include the decision makers on every phase of that stuff. So all these are factors that impact the development of a project and its viability. Next, I'd like to share a brief project development example on how addressing the items discussed above help bring a needed project to successful implementation. So say we have a large baker with a unique high profit margin marquee product. This particular product is produced on a single line using antiquated, inefficient, and unreliable technology. His needs are, number one, to improve the production line performance and reliability to provide improved product quality, reduced product changeover times, and reduce the line downtime. Also, they want to improve safety features and controls to comply with current codes and industry standards. The solution: to upgrade the antiquated production process with new, better performing, more efficient equipment and technology. That's everything that you guys sell. Working with an industry-leading supplier, a solution is identified meeting the bakery's needs to improve production and line performance and reliability and improve the safety features and controls to comply with current codes and industry standards. The identified solution, while addressing the baker's needs, also provides an attractive ROI due to production efficiency gains. At this point, the baker's excited about the prospects of completing the project. However, there's a major hurdle to overcome. Unfortunately, implementation of the full solution requires 3 to 4 days continuous downtime. The 3 or 4 days is not acceptable to the management, as ongoing customer demand for their marquee product must be met. The baker is unable to temporarily transfer production to another source, and due to the product's short shelf life, building an inventory buffer was not possible. The baker's priority of sustaining current production to meet consumer demand is greater than their priority of implementing the identified solution that improves safety and their production process. The inability to disrupt production for the time required to implement threatened the viability of the project everyone knew had to be done. So what do you do? Working together, the baker and the vendor developed a phased project implementation plan. The phased plan worked with the production line's normal 1 down day per week over a 4-week period. A phased implementation plan created the opportunity to implement the original solution without negatively impacting ongoing production needs. With production needs met, the project was approved and funded. The baker placed the order with the vendor. Once completed, the baker enjoyed the heightened safety, improved production process, providing greater quality, reliability, and profitability for his marquee product. The result of the effort was a win-win. Win for the baker, his customers, and the vendor. So back to our project development discussion. Once a project's feasibility is established, priorities have been set, vendors identified, and a viable solution created, it's a good idea to engage in discussions involving the RFP order and approval process. It can also be helpful to incorporate any applicable corporate standards, specifications, or expectations involving safety, mechanical, electrical, documentation requirements, training and aftermarket support expectations in project development, as these items more often than not impact priorities and any identified solutions. Finally, it is often worth reviewing the anticipated form of contract negotiations to be used, standard terms and conditions, payment schedules, and necessity of any penalties, etc., that will impact the project. A deeper dive into the project, approval and order, will be addressed next by Jeff Teasdale. Jeff.
Thanks, Pat. Good job. So we have an intentional overlap there of the development phase and then in the approval. We intentionally put at the end of the development phase that you're starting to share specifications and starting to talk about contracts, because we don't want to get to the point where the baker has got a project approved and funded and we find out that there's some things that we didn't think about for contracts, specifications, and then our scope is not proper any longer. So we get to the agreements and the contracts, and we ask you to think about the baker engineer. At this point, we're managing far more than just the equipment costs to generate our project within our company for approval. Your patience at this time is needed while you're waiting for us to finally get the project going. But we also typically need a lot of follow-ups from you. We're going to have questions as we actually write our project for approval around, it's a continuation of the development phase of the details of how we're going to implement a project. Sometimes we're still waiting for the business case from our business. Oftentimes we're parallel pathing. Engineers, go work on the scope, go work on the cost. We know we need to do this, but the business team is still developing the justification. So sometimes we get ahead of them and we end up waiting. We're going to continue to talk about the details of the equipment and the project. You guys can help us determine, what are the crewing requirements, what's the output of the line, that we can feed this information into the business cases. We're going to want to talk about startup and the training assumptions that are going to go into the contracts, because that oftentimes is something that gets left out of an equipment cost, is what's the cost for installation, training, and startup. Approval typically kicks off the contract negotiation, but like we've said already, we don't want to wait until our project to be approved to start those discussions. Because this is what happens. The little dinghy on the bottom right there was what everybody had originally talked about buying, and we get the big change order on the left. This is solved by great project development and open and fair negotiations before the project's approved. So the Baker-Supplier negotiations, the goal is the best result for all parties, not just the Baker. And remember, the priorities of the project were supposed to be set early, so everyone knows what the priorities of the project were. The Baker's going to need promises on timing, and we may request late penalties. Once a project's approved, everyone's expecting, the business case is built on an expectation of when this project's going to really start providing benefits. So this all has to be agreed to. We're going to agree to the timing of engineering reviews, approvals of those engineering drawings to maintain timing, and the Baker plays a key part here. I'll be honest, sometimes the Bakers aren't doing their part here to help the process. You guys get drawings out to us, and we have to be prompt to turn around and give feedback. And agree to the factory visits and the factory acceptance test criteria and timing. Negotiate your shipping arrangements. Those costs have to be part of our projects. Determine your FAT details, factory acceptance test details. Those are typically a big project. If you do true factory acceptance tests, there's a lot of costs there, a lot of details to be organized, and it's a part of the timeline. What are the performance expectations of the line? What are the remedies to any possible performance shortcomings, and what are the possible penalties? You need to quantify the expected results of the equipment and have clear responsibilities of the people involved in the project. And something I stress, remedies meaning corrections to problems. We'd always rather work on remedies than to start talking about penalties. That's where the teamwork comes in. Keep working on it, find solutions, avoid the talk about penalties. Key people. At this point of the project, you want to make sure all the key people on the project are identified and they start to meet each other. Discuss their spare part expectations. Most of the times, Bakers are supposed to treat spare parts as a future expense, so we need to know what that expectation is, so we can build it into the business case. Discuss the site presence of the key people. Who's going to be on site? Who's the feet on the ground responsible parties for this good project? Now you get to the commitment or the purchase order. Sometimes you're going to get a commitment letter or a commitment email from a Baker like ourselves, because it takes time after a project's approved to get through paperwork and contracts, and oftentimes we have a lot of process to go through to create purchase orders and get checks out for down payments. Some of us don't have the go down the hall and have our friend write a check and get it out the next day mail. We're talking to people in India. Please put this invoice in and get a check out. It's not as easy for some of us. We don't want to hear you say we need your down payment to start this project. Throughout this process of developing a project and negotiating, a trust should have been formed that this project's real. We all have the same goal. We're going ahead. The order's coming. Here's the order. Let's get started. We'll get you the paperwork. We'll get you the down payment as soon as we can. Next, I'll hand it over to Mike. He's going to talk through the active project management phase, which starts after that final order has been placed.
Well, now that all the groundwork's been laid from the presentation pieces of Pat and Jeff, for me, the most important part here is the first three words there is communication, communication, communication. You cannot have enough communication at this point. All of that groundwork that was worked on, all the hard work that was done by the teams, it can fail rather quickly without communication. Part of that to support this, it's important to have project managers, either at the supplier or suppliers, depending on how many are being sourced, as well as the customer or the baker. This way you have key points of contact at each site or at each source, and you can lay all communication through them, and they'll be responsible for communicating down to their teams. The other part of the communication is around schedules. Again, a lot of this has been discussed, but the manufacturing piece at the vendor, the visits and on-site reviews, the FATs, support both from the customer or tier 1s, tier 2s, as well as the installation and post-installation support that we'll talk about here shortly. Finally, as we work on projects, you should have a typical reporting or communication plan. With the communication plan, again, that team, not only your project managers, but all those that are stakeholders or that have skin in the game, they're aware of what's going on. If there are any issues, any changes, they can be up to speed on anything and react accordingly. For us engineers, we probably all know who Dilbert is. I won't read along the slide, but if for the manager here, you can either take this as the manager or the customer vendor relationship. At the end of the day, we just want the truth. If something's a steaming turd, as he calls it, we want to know that. The earlier we know, again, we can work on those remedies that Jeff mentioned. So again, as we're working through this at the manufacturing side, for the supplier, again, lay out the milestones. We need to have these. Again, we're setting things in place at our manufacturing facilities. The vendors or the bakers are. One of the things, and we saw the slide on the little dinghy and the large yachts, the customer change orders. Again, sometimes things happen. While it's unfortunate or unplanned, sometimes we do understand or find something along the way that, we really need to make this change. It's not the right time by any means, but it's going to make the project either more successful or the equipment safer, more reliable, etc. Around the FAT, again, we want to make sure we have the right team members in place, both from the vendor and the baker. Create a punch list of sorts. Again, hopefully that punch list will be short, but with expectations and being realistic about it, we will, as bakers or manufacturers, find issues with the equipment. And again, that's the whole point of it, so that when it comes to our shop or our facility, it works right the first time. And we did talk about the safety checklist. Again, this is a great time to go through and review that safety checklist. Don't do it once, do it twice. The most important asset that we have in our facilities are the people that operate this equipment and make the products. We can't jeopardize that in any way or fashion or form. Again, we need to make sure we have our safety, all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. Again, we talked about the shipping and skidding costs. Some of the equipment's coming domestically, some of it's overseas. Again, we want to make sure we have that wrapped up, the logistics accounted for, and everything else that goes along with that to be managed in that milestones and the timeline. We want to make sure it happens as planned. Finally, from the customer, again, the baker side, there's a lot of activities going on as well. We're getting the site ready for this install. Usually production days, we're running production up until, hours before the project will start. We got to make sure that we have everything ready to go, the crew's on standby, our permits in place, and that we've started our training or implementation to get this going. And with this as well is there's a lot of administrative work. It's not the most glamorous, it's not the most fun, but it's very much needed as part of this process. Again, as we we'll get into the installation or the startup. We want to make sure we have the latest drawings. Again, if we're planning on setting a piece of equipment in a specific spot and things are not aligned, this can cause a lot of issues and delays as we're at the startup phase. Any schematics, diagrams, manuals, anything that's going to help our teams, both maintenance, sanitation, operations, get a little bit ahead of the game, that's going to help us as well. Again, we've talked about that critical parts list. If there are things that are either long lead time or are that critical spare parts, we want to have those on order so that when that equipment is arriving at our dock, we have these spare parts to put in our maintenance shelves as well. And finally, the invoicing and payments. Again, be patient with us. It's not like the old days, I'll say, we could, as Jeff mentioned, walk down the hall and get a check cut. There's bureaucracy, and as engineers, I know we don't like to deal with it, but it's the fact of the matter. And finally, with delivery here, again, we want to make sure that everything is inventory. We want to make sure that everything that was on that shipping log is received and arrived. We do our final site preparation for this installation. Again, as bakers, we got to make sure that all of our GMPs are being met. Our safety checklist, that was reviewed at the vendor is also reviewed at our site, and the team is reviewed and ready to go. So one last comment I leave you with: if everything is going to plan, something somewhere else is going massively wrong. So again, with that, always plan for issues. Again, we can be the best sought out, we can have the best plan on paper, but always something may or will go wrong. So with that, I'll hand this back to Jeff, and he'll lead us home.
Thank you. Now we're at startup. The first 90% of a project takes 90% of the time. The last 10% takes the other 90%. We're at startup. You got product coming off the line, and now you're into the details. This is no time to take the foot off the gas pedal when it comes time to taking care of the communication between the parties. Who's got the feet on the ground? Who's responsible for following up on the details and making the final product right? And beware of scope creep still. When you get into a startup phase and you start having product off the line and you're working in your training plans, things often change, and usually it's from the baker side. We don't have time to train. We need to go into full production now. We can't do the ramp up we had already agreed to. You got to be careful. All parties can be negatively affected if we get off of what was originally planned. Sometimes it's a real need, and if the teams communicate it out and work it through, everyone can still be successful, but just beware. So the previous discussions on expectations are still the key to minimizing these tensions around the startup. Stick to what was arranged, stick to the training plans. Ensure the right people are in place. Those people who are identified to be the key project leads on the ground, make sure they're there. Don't change the scope on who's responsible for what. Safety first. Keep those safety checklists in hand. They should be done before you start the lineup, and there should be another one just after startup to make continual improvements. Make sure you have a checklist and everybody agrees that this line's ready to start up. And if someone doesn't think they're ready, discuss it. See what needs to be done to make it ready. Who owns the action list? Every supplier that's involved and the baker should have a key point person to make sure that everything's being communicated through the same channels and there's no side discussions going on. Go back to the original scope and the agreement. Remember what you guys promised to each other. Any changes, talk them through. Maybe you'll make changes, but they have to be agreed to. Continuing the theme of open communication. Any side conversations that go on during a startup, it's very natural. You got lots of people in the plant trying to make things work, and they're having conversations, they're thinking different things. Bring it back to a meeting as often as you can to get everybody on the same page. Everyone's on the same team. A lot of big projects, you got multiple suppliers. Bakers expect everyone to act as the same team when you get to this phase. We all want suppliers who can work well together in the sandbox. That'll lead to future orders. Remedies. Again, we always want to try to correct our problems before fighting over any penalties or whose fault is it. Work together to determine what the solutions are and how quickly can we get them implemented. Bakers, we got to be honest. Is the reason we're not succeeding because the baker changed something or an assumption going in the project was not right? We got to be honest and adjust. Eventually you get to a closure negotiation. The closure should come back to the contract, what was agreed to and what was documented throughout as the changes. Projects can still be successful even if the scope might have changed, as long as everyone's done their part. And remember, it's still better to promise more improvements than to sign off on penalties. Come back later and do a lessons learned for all the teams. Come back to the site months later. Go through the line together as all the original people. How's the line running? What can we do better next time? And maybe more importantly, what can we still do to make this line better now, and get it to what the best it could possibly be. I want to hand over to Mike Day to sort of conclude everything that we presented from a vendor's angle.
Again, this morning we spent some time. We looked at project development, project order approval. Jeff got into project order approval. Mike looked at active project management, and finally Jeff got back into project completion. We've all been through projects, large and small. There's many things I think that were brought to the table by these folks and through discussions with the other members of the BIF team as to what goes into making a successful project. And out of that, we came up with, out of those 4 areas, we came up with a top 10 list. And in no particular order, the top 10 takeaways we came up with were identifying the project priorities very early on so that we understand what our goals and objectives are. Communicate project specifications and standards early. Make sure that you as a vendor and the baker are on the same page in terms of what the baker's expectations and needs are with respect to what you're going to deliver. Involve all the stakeholders and seek their input. As was commented about production, was commented about maintenance and engineering, sanitation. Those folks need to be engaged in large-scale projects because it is disruptive in the bakery. Communicate and share the info across the team. There shouldn't be any secrets. Everybody should be up to speed on everything that's going on in everybody else's little corner of the sandbox. Communicate openly and consistently and timely. Number 10, point person must own the action list. There should, as commented, there should be a vendor point list and a baker point list, or point person, excuse me. And they should own an action list that, the keeper of the list, if you will, in terms of executing the project. Deliver on promised milestones. Couldn't be more critical. Better to offer remedies and continued improvements rather than exercise penalties. What I heard from all these guys, nobody likes to implement penalties, and they're interested in getting the project done, having it be successful, helping them do what they're trying to achieve. Safety first, food and people, without question. And finally, good partnerships drive best result. In the end, bakers understand that equipment, they want their equipment suppliers and service providers to be successful, and in turn, we as vendors want to help our bakers be successful. So in the end, I think that brings to conclusion the BIF presentation here today.